Deep within the ancient annals of Dungeons & Dragons lore lies a fateful tale that shaped the multiverse and reverberates across the planes of existence to this very day. In a time long forgotten, with the cosmos still in its embryonic and nascent stage, a pact of unfathomable and infernal significance was forged beyond the golden gates of Mount Celestia. A former archangel and ferocious agent of law brokered the most influential and far-reaching pact in the history of time with the very gods of creation themselves. The forever accord between good and evil, steeped in deceit and shadowed intentions. An alliance between the Lord of the Nine and the divine pantheon, bound by cosmic law and the spark that ignited the fires of the Nine Hells. The unholy Pact Primeval, right now on Riches and Liches. Welcome adventurers, I'm Rich and this is Riches and Liches, dedicated to dungeons, dragons, and tales of lore. And so we find ourselves 3 volumes deep in our massive mega series on the Nine Hells. Thank you for continuing this journey with me and all the amazing, kind, thoughtful, and insightful comments. This community, each of you, consistently amaze me. I do hope each of you have seen volumes 1 and 2 before we open this tome, especially volume 2, as this is, in many ways, the conclusion of the Nine Hells origin story we started in our last volume. If you haven't, there should be a link above you right about now. In volume 2, we covered 2 of the 3 primary origin stories, that of the Serpents of Law and He Who Was creation mythologies. And now we've come to our final origin story, the one documented and endorsed as truth by the Candlekeep Scribe of the Damned, Grylee Tomekeeper of Faerun, who we introduced you to in Volume 1. And this one has to be the truth, right? I mean, he said he talked to the devil himself. Why would the Lord of Lies lie about such... Oh, yeah, never mind. Well, regardless, this is the history I choose to regard as canon, but your truth is your own. I merely present the tale. We have so much future lore to cover, literally hundreds of volumes, so please consider supporting the work with a YouTube or Patreon subscription or a super thanks so that I can do this full-time at some point in the future and ensure we can continue this series to its conclusion and far beyond. Thank you. And now I present to you our iconic lore mega series on the Nine Hells, Volume 3, The Devil is in the Details. In the grand theater of the multiverse, there was a time during the earliest formation of the cosmos where only chaos existed, and from this chaos came the manifestation of that evil, powerful demons and their chaotic deities of anarchy. Wanting nothing more than to eternally consume, destroy, and remake, all in a maelstrom of fury and disorder over an immeasurable period before any concept of time was conceived. But a constant state of raw chaos does not a universe make, and so a force arose in direct opposition of this destabilizing influence, the power of law and the principle of order. And like the demons before, these forces coalesced into the instruments and deities of that power, shining symbols in their gleaming armor, wielding weapons forged in enlightened and ordered thought. And so it was for eons that the agents of law waged war with the vortex of chaos. In time, as it was eventually conceived, with no victory in sight, the deities of law began to suspect that perhaps the supply of demonic forces was infinite. At a stalemate and weary of battle, these deities of law wished to move away from this unending war so that they might dedicate themselves to more constructive ambitions, to an intended purpose, such as the creation of worlds within the cosmos, and to populate them with intelligent, mortal beings, their subjects, their genesis. For what is a playground with no children? What is a book with no words? What is a world devoid of mortal life? And so these first deities of law created beautiful beings of virtue and light, winged warriors to serve the gods and continue the eternal battle against chaos. These beings were called angels. In time, one of those created angelic warriors rose far above the rest. While all of these warriors of law and order valiantly fought the demonic forces of chaos, none excelled or thrived in battle like that of one particular angel. He was the most beautiful, the strongest, and the most brave among this elite legion of the divine. His name was Asmodeus. Asmodeus was the god's champion of law and order, having slain more demons than any among him, and this continued for a millennia. But in time, with the intimate exposure to such evil that came with each and every victory, Asmodeus and his legion became ever more corrupted. Where the gods of lawful good, as they became known, looked to quell the chaos, within Asmodeus grew a seething hate for the demonic, for the disorder. The lack of structure and purpose was, to him, obscene. It is here that Asmodeus and the members of his terrible but effective company would eventually begin to take the form of the devils we know today, taking on some of their demonic traits in order to better combat them, slowly becoming twisted beyond the recognition of their original celestial origins. This transformation began to inspire fear among the other angels and even the gods themselves. And so the celestial realms petitioned the great gods of law to banish Asmodeus and his company of avenging angels. And to that intended end, Asmodeus was put on trial before the god of valor, Hieronius, for crimes against the heavens. During this first trial, Asmodeus readily responded to these false charges, expertly reading directly from the very tablets of the law he himself helped the gods create. Asmodeus, as a supremely effective force against chaos, argued mightily that his actions were at the will of the gods, not in opposition, that they were, in fact, lawful and just. He confidently argued that he and his legion, as servants of the gods, performed their duties of law and order as proxy to the gods and their wishes, that they had blackened themselves so that the gods could remain golden and virtuous. Asmodeus powerfully argued that he and his legion had upheld the laws, not broken them, and therefore it would not be just to cast them out. Try as they might, and despite a growing distaste for what Asmodeus had become, the gods of law, with their own good-natured and just ideologies, could find no counters in their tablets of law to this dark angel's arguments. For Asmodeus knew the laws better than any, and could wield their clauses like a finely sharpened dagger, skillfully crafting his points of fact with surgical precision. And so Asmodeus and his ever-corrupting legion continued their visceral war against the abyssal forces. With the passage of time and the continued slaying of demons, the visage of Asmodeus and his war band continued to grow ever more alarming, ever more infernal. The deities were increasingly displeased and distressed, but could find no lawful and just way to stop them. So the gods tried to turn a blind eye to Asmodeus and his own infernal interpretation and implementation of their laws. They retreated to their great project, the creation of mortals and the verdant worlds for those favored beings to live upon. But when demons invaded these worlds as well, Asmodeus and his outcast legion were once again called upon to stop them, despite their unsavory tactics. And once again, Asmodeus and his dark angels succeeded in driving back the demonic Tanar'ri, victorious as ever. No one questioned his legion's effectiveness, only his vile methods. But in time, the deities of law made a horrifying discovery. The mortals, these beings of their own creation, the progeny of their just and good powers, had a strong tendency to disregard the rule of divine law, and this invited chaos back into the realm. The deities, angry but also confused, did not understand why. Asmodeus, the ever-crafty silver-tongued negotiator, seized upon opportunity. He convinced the gods that to give mortals free will requires consequence, that there can be no law without punishment. The gods at this time had no concept of punishment, this an invention of Asmodeus himself. The future Lord of Hell then explained,
When laws are broken, the wrongdoers must be made to suffer as a warning to others. Thus, your mortal creations, using this free will you have so gracefully bestowed upon them, can choose between the paradise of rightful action and the torment of wickedness.
The gods, again, could find no flaws in their dark champion's logic. Indeed, how could mortals be expected to choose virtue if evil went unpunished? And so the gods agreed. It was on that day the deities began to realize a cosmic truth, that law and chaos were not the only principles in the universe, that good and evil were also natural forces of the cosmos. And so the once unified pantheon of lawful gods began to separate themselves from one another, to form their own ideological factions, all on that newly discovered basis of good and evil. Yet another universal force introduced to the cosmos, the genesis of which was the future Lord of the Nine. With this new decree, the gods of law and order and good handed down their updated laws and sent their clerics throughout the mortal lands to announce this new concept of punishment for sin, that mortals had a choice of torment or divine law, and the gods were pleased with this arrangement. They truly thought that unwavering obedience would certainly follow, with no expectation of any mortal foolishly choosing to be punished. But in time, as mortals died, souls flowed into the celestial planes who bore the stink of transgression, smelling of brimstone, smoke, and sulfur, acrid upon the graceful and fragile senses of the gods. Asmodeus, aided by Despater, Mephistopheles, and others of his dark brigade, set about enacting their lawful punishment. They tormented, burned, and flayed these sinners and placed them upon racks to wail in eternal suffering. The shrieks of the damned reverberated throughout the heavens, and the flowers of the gods' idyllic gardens wilted, dripping with the blood of the agonized. The deities of law tried to shut their ears, but they could not abide the horror. So they placed Asmodeus in chains and once again charged him with high crimes against the heavens. Asmodeus calmly answered his accusers.
O great gods of law and order, I have merely done as instructed as your champion and servant under the terms of the very laws you drafted.
Again, the gods, ever frustrated but bound by their own ideological doctrines, had to admit he was right. But Asmodeus, always scheming and brilliant of mind, had a further proposal for the gods.
You wish to see your divine laws upheld, but you do not care to witness its dark reality. Of that, I certainly understand. So to preserve your delicate sensibilities, I humbly offer to remove these unsightly but necessary actions from your prismatic eyes and golden ears, so that you may focus on your celestial endeavors. To accomplish this, with your permission, my followers and I will take our project of consequence and punishment elsewhere. We will build a perfect hell for you. You will gain from its existence, but never need lay eyes upon it. We shall put it there.
Asmodeus pointed to an empty, barren wasteland, of which is now called Baator. The gods, all nodding in agreement, eager to remove this vial from their presence, were quick to agree. But Asmodeus, sensing their impatience and ever conniving, paused a moment, and then responded that first a pact would need to be made. The gods were reticent at first. However, Asmodeus posited if he and his legions were to leave the divine realm, as the gods so wished, that they would no longer be able to draw power from the gods and Mount Celestia with which to manage such a monumental task as this, a formation of a hell for the gods. So his proposal, this pact, would allow him and his legions to, legally and bound by celestial law, detach from the divine gods and instead derive their power from those souls that were punished. Unless, as the dark angel countered himself, the gods wished to deify Asmodeus and his legion, making them independent gods themselves, the mere thought of which repulsed the gods. And so the Pact Primeval was created, a signed, lawful, and celestial-bound contract to determine the boundaries of hell and the rules for the transmission of wicked souls. Upon its signing, Asmodeus, Mephistopheles, and Despater departed the heavens for Mount Celestia for their new home in Baator, which was then a bleak and featureless plain, devoid of all the unholy grandeur that the hells are known for today. Joining them were a vast legion of other dark angels that called themselves Irinees, and so it came to be. But we're not quite done yet. The deities of virtuous law initially reveled in their newly purified celestial domains, joyous to be free of the cruelty, torment, and sheer offensiveness of the infernal dark angels for the first time. It was not for many years, in mortal terms, that the gods discovered an alarming drop in the number of souls that were sent to the various celestial heavens. In time, however, the gods eventually discovered, upon conferring with their celestial clergy, that the infernal devils, as they were now called, were actively corrupting mortals, bribing them with deceitful dark pacts, contracts, and bargains, ensuring their mortal souls to damnation by turning them toward evil. The celestial deities, furious, formed a delegation which set off immediately to Baator in order to confront Asmodeus. Upon their arrival, they were shocked and horrified to see that the once desolate plain had been utterly transformed into a grand but horrific, inverted mountain plain, descending ever deeper, its 9 tiers, an unholy amalgamation of monstrous evil and cruel torment. Within its treacherous confines, the gods of lawful good witnessed in a mix of bewilderment and anger the magnificent evil that had been built from this barren wasteland. Each layer a new form of terror and agony, yet bathed in the splendor of radiant citadels, towering spires, and powerful dark fortresses. The gods watched countless souls writhing in pain and agony. They witnessed these souls being transformed right before their delicate eyes, first into writhing maggot-like larvae, then crawling into formless blobs, to mindless monsters, and eventually into an army of powerful, brutish devils. The gods were furious. Hieronius in particular was seething, demanding Asmodeus to address this nefarious action. Asmodeus grinned and responded that they were granted the power to harvest souls, but to build their hell and strengthen their might to fulfill their task of punishment on the gods' behalf, they naturally had to find ways to increase their yield. The war deity, now incensed, seeing Asmodeus as the lord of lies and deceit, drew forth his long sword of cracking lightning.
It is your job to punish transgressions, not encourage them.
Asmodeus' smile slowly turned sinister. His normally disarming grace dropped from his tone. His gaze pierced the god of valor, no longer paying reverence. His form stepped closer, no longer showing obeisance. And then he spoke just 4 words.
Read the fine print.
And while that ends the story of the Pact Primeval, it is also the beginning of the trial of Asmodeus, a topic we will cover in Volume 4. But don't click away just yet. Before we close this episode, as always, we will close out each volume with some quick fiendish facts and or reviled rumors. Today I have 2 more fiendish facts for you to ponder. Fiendish fact number 3. Regarding the Pact Primeval, of which we just discussed, I offer you this fact as a kernel of information you might consider using as a driver or even a red herring for any future world building in the Nine Hells or any of the planes of law, order, and neutrality. There are in fact actually 3 signed copies of the Pact Primeval. One is kept in the Nine Hells, understood to be hidden and secured somewhere on Asmodeus' home realm, the 9th layer of Nessus. It is said that this copy of the Pact is encased in a magically enchanted ruby that is 10 feet high and 6 feet wide, weighing 20 tons. Now, far be it from me to question the Lord of the Nine, but I'm not sure how easy it is to hide a 20-ton ruby, but we'll leave that to any heroic group foolish enough to venture there and find out. There is also one copy located in Mechanus, said to be protected by Primus himself, and yet another is guarded in Mount Celestia. These pacts are said to be impervious to destruction by natural means, and if removed from the lawful planes, chaos would only be strengthened. It is because of that last statement that the lawful good forces have never attempted to secure the other 2 copies and try and revoke the contract. Its presence in the cosmos works to keep chaos at bay, and if revoked, would harm all 3 lawful domains. Fiendish fact number 4. All Faustian pacts and fiendish contracts made with mortals are done so by invoking the residual magic of the original contract, the Pact Primeval. In fact, these bargains, contracts, and pacts all include language referencing the Pact Primeval in some way. For example, it might read, "This contract is forever binding in virtue of the Pact Primeval," or "This pact is agreed upon with the power of the Pact Primeval." And you may now wonder why. What power does that hold? Well, it is actually very important in the lore of all these mortal contracts. The power of the Pact Primeval makes these contracts forever binding, or at least until, and if ever, those 3 copies are removed from the lawful planes and or destroyed. And if that were to happen, chaos would ensue, literally, as by removing all contracts would instantly free all eternal souls that arrived by contract, and thus creating a massive, never before seen level of chaos across the multiverse. And that concludes Volume 3. Join us for Volume 4, where we will cover the trial of Asmodeus, as well as the conflicting origins of his legendary Ruby Rod, all in exacting detail. Oh man, we are 3 volumes deep and yet have barely scratched the surface. So much more to cover. Are you as excited as I am? I really hope you'll continue this journey with me, strength in numbers and all. Please consider following on Twitter at Riches and Liches, checking out our Patreon, Discord, YouTube channel memberships for as little as $2 or a super thanks, the equivalent of buying that man a drink at the local tavern for a job well done. And if you feel like I earned it, maybe sub and ring that bell to help me grow this amazing community. As always, thanks for listening, and until next time, remember, the only limitation at your table is your imagination.